Thank you. Yeah, so I guess I can more or less skip the introduction. Yeah, I am a father of 2 kids, soon to be 3. My wife is pregnant and she's giving birth in like 3 weeks or 4 weeks, so I'm heading home right tomorrow so I don't miss it. But I'm super excited to be here. This is my first time in Israel, and I'm very happy. It's nice. I am Danish. I put the flag up here because today we're playing a game at the World Championships. So between 3 and 4 or 3 and 4:30, I won't be around. I'll be in the speakers area and watching the soccer game. I'm a GDE. I work at a company called Impact. We focus on commerce, so we help our clients build great commerce experiences. But enough about this. I have to put the slide here. They pay my salary to be here, so of course it's important that I show it. Let's actually talk about using Angular in a more dynamic way. A lot of what we do is building for CMSs. So we've been using AngularJS for years and years, and it fit our needs really well because it's very dynamic. We can just put it on any page that a CMS could render. We could use it just for a part, just use it for a gallery, or just use it for because we do commerce, use it just for the basket or just for parts of the page. And it's very flexible that way. Then when the new Angular or Angular 2 or whatever you want to call it was announced, we were very excited because it solved some of the problems that we wanted to fix, but it also gave us some new problems. And this is going to be like a 28-minute talk where I'll go through our journey of the problems, some of the problems that we ran into, and the solution that we figured out. A great way how to achieve the flexibility of a CMS with the static nature of how Angular works. So in order for us to create these really good experiences, we really want to use, we want the editor to be able to change pretty much anything, anytime, and that to be reflected in the app. So obviously we came from AngularJS, so we thought we can just do something like this, like we did in AngularJS, just bootstrap our module on the body tag, and we're good to go. But obviously, if you've been following it along just a little bit with Angular, you know it doesn't work this way because we always need to bootstrap a component. So we start not at an app level, but at a component level. So in Angular, it looks like this. So we do our ng module and we declare what component to bootstrap. But the problem is that there's not really one component to bootstrap when everything's bootstrapping from a CMS. We don't really have a root component. We have, a basket component and a gallery component and stuff. So we really need to bootstrap multiple components. So it's a little harder because we need to maintain some kind of state in what stuff in the CMS is actually an Angular component, so we can keep a list of what components to bootstrap. And if there's 2 galleries on the same page, we actually need to tell Angular what div holds what component or what instance of what component, and it becomes a little more complex. You can imagine something like this, and it could work, but it kind of takes a lot of the logic and a lot of the flexibility out because we need to duplicate a lot of logic from in the CMS and in Angular, and we really don't want that. And then there's the part about initial data and content. Like, how do we feed the data that the CMS editor enters in the CMS into the actual components? So in AngularJS, or we would do inputs and put in serialized JSON or something, and then we could do transclusion and actually get content in. And we can imagine that we could do something like this with Angular, where we use content transclusion with the ng content tag and put some data in via regular input. You can imagine this, but I have to put this up again because it turns out that we can't really do this on entry components. So on the components that are actually bootstrapped. So the root components, they cannot have inputs because you can't statically analyze them, and they can't use content projection. So that was kind of a bummer. There's a real good story on the issue here I'm linking to where they explain why it's that way, and it's due to performance, and there's a lot of good reasons, but it kind of sucked anyway. So I was feeling a little bit hacky when I came to this conclusion. This was still before, like, back in the alpha days, so there wasn't this final 2.0 release yet. I was still just hacking along trying to make this work. So I thought to myself, how about we make a body component? So imagine we would do something like this. We would do a selector on the body, and then we could do template and just grab the string right out of the inner HTML of the body tag. And as terrible as this looks, it actually works. I was a little bit surprised by this, but you can actually do this. But you shouldn't, just to be clear. You should not do this. And the reason is, that means that we would need the parse-out runtime. We can't do any of the compilation, the AOT compilation and stuff, which means we'll include we'll have a ginormous Angular bundle because we can't tree shake anything, and it's terrible. So you should absolutely not do this. You can if you want to, and it's fun for prototyping. So remember, we're still pre 2.0 release at this time. But now I'll just take a quick jump forward just to keep in track of my story and talk a little bit about Angular elements. Rob mentioned it again this morning. I know he's very excited about it, and so am I, because this really solves the problem that we're trying to solve here. We want to be able to just put a mini basket in or put a gallery in anywhere on the page and use Angular for that. And this is exactly what Element does. I think actually if I was going to start this approach today, or if I was going to migrate an existing AngularJS CMS solution to new Angular, this would probably be the way to go, because that would mean you could have components that were Angular components. You could bootstrap them as Angular elements or as custom elements. You could use them individually side by side with AngularJS components, and then when you've migrated all your components, then you could actually swap it out and go full single page app. Just to recap, I think Rob mentioned this again, but it's pretty simple. The API is pretty simple. You just call register as custom elements on a module or on a component with the module, and you're good to go. But in order to create really nice experience, commerce experience, we call it because we do commerce, but in order to do this, we still want to have page transitions. And in order for that, obviously, we need a SPA, we need a single page app. So we want to be able to share a state from one page to another, so we don't have to reload it all the time. We want to be able to animate route changes. We want to be able to cache data. We want to be able to maintain some parts of the page, not reloading all the time whenever you navigate around. So I just recorded a quick screen demo just to show you what we're looking for. So here's a very simple Danish front page. You see me, clicking around, and there's different page templates. It's not really that pretty, but it's just demoing that there's multiple pages. Some of them are lazy loading content. They're product pages, and then there's content pages and all that stuff, and they can do a lot of the stuff that we want. So this is the end goal. This is where we want to end. So in Angular, it starts with a router. We define something like this, where we say, so the slash route or the front is the front page component. Then there's a product route, which should be a product component, and so on. But the problem is that it's not very dynamic. In a CMS, typically the editor can change the URL schemes of where the products live, and so the slash route might be a front page, and then something might be a content page, and some other thing might be a category page, and you can't really make one regex that would fit all of these and make a really good routing rules. So I was stuck here for a while. I talked to some of the guys from the Angular team, and they were like, maybe you could let the CMS actually output a route config, because we want the CMS to be the only one that knows or the source of truth on the route information. We want that to be the CMS. So maybe that could happen. But the problem is that would mean that every time any page would change, we would need to re-invalidate all that and download it again, and we would need some kind of mechanism for the CMS to tell the clients that there's been an update so they could get all the routes, and because otherwise they'll just get stuck on the route config they get when they first load the page. And the idea, which is also the problem with single page apps, is that the user never reloads. So they could actually, open their computer, close it, come back two weeks later and open the computer again and just resume the session. And if everything was in memory, they would never reload the route configuration, and they would be stuck on a very old version of the site. So again, in a little bit of a hacky or creative mood, I thought to myself, we should just have one route to rule them all. We could imagine a CMS would output something like this instead, which more or less correlates to like a data model of a page. We see in the bottom here that there's like a string representing what template to use, and then a lot of specific data that might fit only that data or that template. Turns out most CMSs can output this kind of stuff right out of the box. If you're using WordPress, it's a one-click thing. Most of the CMSs can do it. If not, it's typically pretty easy to hack into like a view pipeline, and at the very end, listen for something like if there's a certain query parameter, instead of outputting HTML, just output like a JSON serialization of the model. We did this with a couple of different CMSs, and obviously the output is a little bit different, but that's not really important. The important part is that we can actually get all of this information out in the client, and when we navigate around, we get this afresh every time there's a new click, and then we decide based on the content, what route to render or what template to use. So imagine that we just have one generic route. If you just do ***, it'll match anything, and if it's the first route we use, it'll never go any further than that, so that's the only route we'll ever use. We'll get the data in a resolve. So on routes, we can define that whenever this route resolves, we should get the content from this resolver. A resolver is just a class that has a resolve method on it, and here I'm just turning around and just putting the call straight out to the server. You could probably put some caching in here so we don't hit the server every time, but if we're at the same URL, but for the sake of simplicity, just this is a pretty simple setup to imagine. And then we need to actually figure out what to render. So in AngularJS, we could just use the compile service. The $compile service, as Rob mentioned, is probably one of the most requested features for new Angular. But we can't do that because we don't have the compiler or the template parser at runtime. So that was a bit of a problem again. So I couldn't just generate a string based on the template name and put that in and open a tag that way. So I was feeling hacky again. So I thought, how about we make a template where we put all the components that you should be able to load as individual components and put ngIfs on them. So something like this, where we have a front page, which we will use if the template name is front page, and so on and so forth. So again, this is not very pretty, but it works, and it's sufficient for a prototype. It seems kind of wrong to do it this way, and but it works for now. Until you start clicking around, but then it turns out that nothing happens. Because you're not really changing the route, you're just changing the option. Because now we're back at the problem where we're using the same route every time. And in Angular, if you're going from one route to the same route with new options, we're not reinitializing the route. So, trying to work around this, I thought, so let's refactor a bit so that the generic component that we use, instead of it just having that template as before and getting the data once, will just subscribe to the data and update the page data every time it changes, and that would actually mean that it would work. This is pretty good. We're at a place where we have a working solution. But then the problem is that what if we go from, it works when we go from a front page to a product page and back, but if I go to from one product page to another product page, it's the same problem, because then we're just, the problem kind of cascades downwards. So I could do all of that on pretty much all the components if I wanted to, and it would just make it way worse. It's just not a very elegant solution. So this was, I think, 3-4 weeks before Angular 2.0 final actually shipped. And if you don't remember, there was a lot of breaking changes around the RCs around that time. And then came RC4. So this was my favorite RC, and this was the release candidate that solved my problem. So with RC4, the team actually gave us access to the component factory resolver, so we could actually figure out and bootstrap our component factories ourselves. So it looks something like this. You see, it's just I get them in line 16 and 17 just with regular dependency injection. I make a factory in line 9. I call the component factory resolver.resolve component factory. It almost feels like Java when it's just all the names just in the opposite way when you call the method on it. You call it with the component that you want to bootstrap or that you want to show, and then you call create component on the view ref, and then you just put some data on it. So this is how you work with inputs that way. So this put the beauty back in the code. Now we have one route, and we have the component factory resolver. So we don't have all the ugly templating going on with all the ngIfs. So this begs a question: what components should be available? So I thought about this a little bit, because obviously we don't want to be able to bootstrap individual small implementation detailing components as if they were page templates. So I came up with the solution where I just put a static name, or I called it ref, on any class that would, and this would contain the string that the CMS would know. So this would be front page or product list or whatever it would be. And then I just make a list that contains all the components that should be available this way. So all the generic component really does is every time the data changes, it loops through all of these and checks which one on the static, so just on the constructor, which one has that specific ref, and it bootstraps that component. And just a single note, because these are not referenced from any template, we need to put them in the entry components so the tree shaker just doesn't shake them away. The problem is we still can't animate page transitions because it's still not really a page transition, because we're just loading a generic page once, and then we're just, every time the data changes, every time the subscription change, we're still just recreating the view. So we need a way to actually to fix this. And a good way is, so the reason because it's that way is that if you go from one giant product list and you go to a route, and then you go to just a different, you just change some options on it, you don't want to render everything again. So it's actually a performance feature. It's not a bug, it's a feature of the router. But for us, it kind of felt like a bug because we wanted to use it in a different way. So it turns out you can actually define your own router reuse strategy. So like anything else in Angular, it's configurable. So a router reuse strategy is just a class that implements the router reuse strategy and has a couple of methods on them that determines whether it should reuse the route, how it should detach, or blah 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 blah. The only important thing is that I just made a simple version that just has the should reuse route return false always, and that means that whenever there's a route change, we reload the route. So this actually means, oh yeah, this is how you use it. So in your providers, you just say whenever Angular asks for the router reuse strategy, you just use mine instead. So this actually means that now we have real route change, so we can do real route animations, which is super awesome. That brings us to the next problem, which is rich text, because anytime there's a user on a CMS, they want a rich text editor. They want to be able to highlight text and make it bold and make it a link and all that stuff. Yeah, you know, rich text editors, they look something like this is Sidecore, but they all do this in some way or the other. And what I imagine is that we just add a content or whatever property to the data model that would just return a ginormous blob of text. And if you've been using AngularJS like I have, you would just think, let's just do ng-bind HTML. All is good, everything works, and that's not really how it works with Angular. So on Angular, you can actually bind directly to an element's property. And the property name for stuff like this would just be inner HTML. So we could do something like this. We just put the template and bind directly to the inner HTML property on the div here, and put the page data. This should probably be page data.content if that would be the name of it. So this actually works, and it gives you the output that you want. But then you start clicking around, and you see that anytime you click a link that came from this, it'll actually reload the page because the router doesn't know. The router doesn't know that this is a link that it should cover, because Angular doesn't know anything that you just put inside inner HTML. So yeah, so the router doesn't automatically hijack all links like UI router or the ng router from AngularJS did. So I was thinking, how about we make an href directive? But we can't do that either, because as I said, Angular doesn't know anything about what you put inside the inner HTML property of a div element, and the compiler is still not here at runtime, so it doesn't know anything like that. So I was thinking again, and I came up with a solution where on the same element as you put the inner HTML on, we just make a host listener that listens for all clicks, and if it's a click on an A tag, let's just cancel or prevent the default on it and call router.navigate. So I made a very simple link interceptor directive that I can just put on. So anytime I do inner HTML equals some content that's from a CMS, I put this directive on it, and it works. So there's a star here, because it is actually a little bit more complicated than that, because what if you click a div inside of an A tag, then there's no href on the div, and that would be the target and stuff. But for the sake of presenting it, this is how it's done. There will be a link on the very last slide to an actual implementation of this. So this is all we ever wanted without all the ugly stuff. So now we're in a world where the CMS can change any route at any time, and we would actually still render the right information at the right time. We have page transition animations. We have everything that we want. Obviously, like if you want to do dynamic spots, this would be the same thing. And the cool thing is that since this is real Angular and you're doing it the right way, AOT just works out of the box with this. So the eventual bundle is very efficient and small, and it's very fast. And that brings me to the next topic, or to the final topic, which is server-side rendering. Because obviously, if you're doing a CMS, you want your content to be, or if you're using a CMS, you typically want the content to be, indexable by Google, or you want the user to be able to share a link to Facebook and actually have the preview render correctly. And this is what Universal is for. So Angular Universal is a project that was actually, I think it started outside of their core team, and then they moved it in eventually. But this is exactly what it solves. But the problem is it's kind of hard to wrap your head around what this actually does and how it works when you look at it. As soon as you start looking at it, it turns out it's actually pretty simple. But if you haven't looked at it yet, I just want to give you like the 30-second introduction to how it works and why it works. So the idea is, normally we have our app module, and that's where we build from. And then the idea with server-side rendering or with Universal is that we have a browser module and a server module. And they both just import your app module. And then they change some dependencies based on how you do, HTTP requests on the server versus how you do it in the browser, and there's no DOM and there is a DOM and all that kind of stuff. If you're doing it right now, the CLI helps you, and it gives you most of this more or less out of the box. But just to show you, this is not really, you don't have to read this. The point is just to see the ng module stuff is very, very similar. It's importing your app, it's bootstrapping your app component on both places, but it's the version from the server and the version from the client, and they're very similar. And as always, if you're doing this, remember, you can't ever touch anything directly that doesn't live both places. So you can't touch the DOM, you can't do HTTP with the fetch or something. You have to do it through the Angular services, because they will take care of all of this for you. One thing to note, though, is that in order for this to actually be performant, I wanted to come up with the solution where whenever I get the initial page and it's actually already rendered for me on the server, I don't want the client to start getting all the same data again for the same route, because obviously that's how it's built. So we would do that out of the box if it didn't. So we kind of want a way to maintain state from the server generated code out into the client. And at the time, there was no way to do this. I found a project that's called the State Transfer Service, and this was actually the project that eventually became into core. So if you're doing it today, it's just at Angular Platform Server, and then there's a State Transfer Service that you can just, which you can think of as more or less just a cache that you can put data in and read data from, and that will take care of restoring the cache from the cache that was actually on the server. So the initial page or all the initial math that the server does, it doesn't have to be redone on the client side. So this brings me to my more or less final point, which is about caching of the server-side rendering. Because we want to be able to cache this really, really hard, so all the first pages can load really fast, and Google will be impressed with us, and they will uprank our pages in search. And obviously for e-commerce, this is really, 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 really important, because SEO is the number one. That's where all your sales come from. So if we want to be able to put this on a CDN, it cannot work with personalization. So it cannot. You can't do anything where there's any user-specific data or anything. You can't do any of that in your server-side render, because all of them will get the same. So it's just the caching. You can think of it more or less just as a store or as a database or something where the key is the URL and the value is a large long string of HTML. And in order for that to work, you can't do any personalization this way. But how do we tell Angular to use server-side render some parts of our application and not all of them, and how should we really think about this? And I thought there's really three strategies for this, for personalization. Sometimes we could just do it when the client bootstraps, so we can say, so you show the list of products that are generic and for all, and then whenever that would mean that Google and Facebook and all, they would just get the unpersonalized version. And then whenever the client wakes up, we could do it at client bootstrap, and so just don't put it in the state transfer service. So that means that whenever the client bootstraps, it will get it again from the server, and that's actually a real request with your session in it, so we can do personalized content that way. We could do that at the first user interaction. So again, if it's a product list, maybe the first time the user actually selects show me only the yellow ones, or show me only the cheap ones, or from this brand or whatever, we'll just then do the HTTP request, and from then on it's going to be personalized. Or sometimes it doesn't really make sense to have something that's unpersonalized. So we need a way to tell Angular this part of the application, just don't server-side render this. So if your app has a login and you want it to say hi Philip when you're logged in, it doesn't really make sense to say hi and no one or hi anonymous and then reload it with the real data. You just want it to not be there until the browser knows that I'm Philip. So I made a very simple no SSR directive for this matter exactly. So it's a very simple directive where I just put, when it's initialized, it's just looking to see if it's the platform, if it's on the server, just clear the view container so it doesn't server-side render. And if it's on the server, or if it's in the client, it works just as intended. So this would be, you could just use this in OSSR directive on any element, and it will still work in the browser, but it won't server-side render. So this more or less gives you everything we want. We have full server-side render. Everything comes from the CMS. Everything's dynamic. We made it. This was a long journey. My time is just about up. So over the last couple of months, I've been working with a colleague to actually package some of this up. We put it on NPM, so you can find it here. There's a README there that explains the parts that doesn't make sense in a library, but that's just configuration stuff. So if you go there, take a look at the README, and as always, reach out if you can't find it, or if it doesn't work, or if you have problems. And that's it from me. Go find me. I'm here for the rest of the day. Come talk to me if you'd like. Yep. Thanks for having me.